Well, good day, everybody. Bill Kenny here with Meet, and it's a pleasure today to see you again and have this wonderful topic around market research. So the title, just to remind everybody, is What You Don't Know Can Kill Your Business, Nailing Market Research for U.S. Market Entry. And it's our pleasure today to welcome Michael Vigeant, the CEO of Greatblue Research with us. Michael, welcome.
Thanks for having me, and good day to everyone. Appreciate being here.
Excellent. Well, Michael, we've got people from all over the world who are interested in growing their business, many of which are considering U.S. market entry or are already here. Others are expanding in the U.S. or around the globe and concerned about this topic of market research. And there's so many different tools. There's so much information out there. This is a topic we've had in demand for quite some time, and the number of sources, I think, has just grown quantumly over the last many years. But before we dive too deep into this topic, it'd be great to know a little bit more about Greatblue Research and certainly your background. If you don't mind, just give us a little bit of the background.
Yeah, so kind of an interesting story where it all started. It was actually, I was 12 years old and went to a camp for kids with cancer and ran across the gentleman who would become my mentor and the founder of the company I now run in 1979. So that gentleman, that mentor, the gentleman that brought me into his business was a camp counselor when I was young. So the story starts way back then. I won't bring you through age 12.
Thank you.
But to jump ahead, after graduating from college in '98, really focusing my degree in marketing and communications, advertising and new product, new service, branding and messaging was really where I was headed. And as I had this conversation with my mentor, he said, "Hey, how good are you in math?" And I said, "I love math." He said, "Well, I think your background and the math skills will work really well in this industry." So he brought me on right out of college, spent 13 years working with him. And in those 13 years, it was really, if you've ever seen the US show Mad Men, that's how market research was back in the day. It was big budgets. It was long timelines. What we did in 8-12 weeks in the late 90s, we do in 8 to 12 days today. So it's all about getting good information, doing it quickly, getting the right information to help solve problems and answer business questions. It's about understanding audiences, all those sorts of things. So the methodologies of what we do and how we do it has changed, but it hasn't changed in many ways. It stayed the same. It's still about asking the right questions, getting the information that allows you to make business decisions and understand your audience and how to meet their expectations and or exceed them. So it was a really interesting time frame in around 2009. That mentor was really wanting to kind of slow down a little bit. He had been at the helm for almost 30 years at that point. And he said, "Hey, look, I want to slow down. Your position to grow. Let's do an amicable split." He took about a dozen or so clients. I took the rest. And we've literally hit the ground running from there. So for the last 10 years or so, I've been working and running Greatblue Research, have an amazing team of skilled professionals ranging in interest and skill sets all over the map, because importantly, what we do and being a good researcher and helping businesses do what they do better, there has to be a good wide variety of skill sets and business acumen that you can bring to the table. So that's something we're really proud of. We're working hard to bring our information to folks quickly in a price sensitive way within budget. And usually it's how quickly can you get it for me, because I needed that information yesterday. So in today's day and age, folks are really embracing data. They're really embracing analytics to make business decisions, and more folks are using that and not making decisions without it. So it's been a fun time in our industry. We're having a lot of fun and working with a lot of new people. So from an overview standpoint, that gives you a little bit about it. As I think as we go through today, more and more examples will show up, but I'm really proud to be here today, and thanks so much for having me, Bill.
Absolutely. Great to have you. So just so everybody knows the sort of format and context here. So I'm going to share some questions with Michael. Kind of think of this as like meet the press. It'll be, sort of a hard grilling. And if we see him sweat, no, just kidding. This is all fun and friendly. And so we'll have a good repartee here. And then many of you have submitted questions, which we're going to get to as well. So stay tuned, buckle up, and we'll have some fun here. So we've talked a little bit about Greatblue, and we've talked a little bit about your background. Let's actually get into the topic. So I'm just referencing a list of questions here. So, so when you think of the companies that you work with, and thinking about the things particularly that company leaders should consider when they're getting ready for U.S. market entry, what are some of the things that you would want them to consider?
I think most importantly is really who the audience they're looking to serve is, whether it's a product or a service. Understanding that audience is most important, and this can be done in a variety of ways. But I think if there's really kind of four things, I like to give some buckets or bullet points to take away. I think number one, flexibility and agility is so important in today's marketplace. No matter what you're doing, it's understanding that audience. That's number two is understanding the audience. Once you have some understanding of the audience, it's really about understanding expectations, what the expectations of that audience is, where they're being met, where they're being unmet, where they're being serviced, unserviced, those sorts of things. And then once you understand those variables, it allows you that ability now to start putting together a strategic plan, working towards that market. But I think more often than not, Bill, one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make is they come in with whatever plan they had in their origin country and said, this will work in the U.S., and don't ask the questions. Sometimes the simplest business questions could answer some of the most complex problems that people face. So it's a little bit of homework up front, and being humble enough to change your angle of approach or how you market, how you communicate based on what the market here in the U.S. Is looking for and how they want to be communicated with.
So you're kind of anticipating my questions for sure in terms of going to sort of the big mistakes that people make. But let's go down that path a little bit. So when an executive or a CEO sort of disregards the sort of market knowledge from a new market they're entering. It could be entering the U.S. or just simply putting a new product into market. It's really probably a lot of the same issues. But what are the things that you tend to see happen when they sort of disregard that market knowledge?
I think there's a belief more often than not that the same product or the same service or the same decision will work in different situations. And many times it does, right? We've all heard about, well, trusting my gut got me here. And that's true of a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders, and they have a playbook, if you will. The playbook is changing. If there's anything that I've seen from audience measurement, and look, I've been doing this my entire professional career, the audiences are changing. They have different expectations. And so I know my customer, I know what they think, that's changing because what they know and what they think has evolved. And it may be some of the same balloon or hierarchy, 30,000 square foot ideas, but how it breaks down and what they think at a more defined level has changed dramatically. And understanding that is what makes all the difference. And I see it, for example, where if we see a customer satisfaction index number or a patient satisfaction or an employee satisfaction index number, they'll take a look at the cumulative total, the top 2 box or the top 4 box, and say, we're at 90%, when in reality, the very satisfied or that top 1 or 2 has gone from 70 to 60 to 50 to 40. And then the somewhat or the number 2 or the number 3 scores are going up, which means that people are moving in the wrong direction. The cumulative total is still there, but diving in and understanding what's moving folks. And typically it falls into one of 2 categories. My expectations have changed, and you're servicing me the same way based on my previous expectation. Or number 2, I don't understand how you as an organization has changed. Therefore, what I don't know is hurting you. So in many cases, it's not so much that an organization is doing something wrong as much as it is, I don't know how you've solved the problem that I have. Therefore, I can't rely on your solution for said problem.
Right. So it's somewhat understanding the trends, not just the raw numbers. So, thinking about, and again, putting this in the context for the moment of market entry, the idea that whether someone's coming from Europe or Asia, South America, Africa, Australia, into the U.S. and is it reasonable to look at the U.S. as one market? So just thinking of business to business as an example, do you find when you're doing market research, are there some regionalizations of information or whether it's products or service fit or how we communicate to those different, and it could be geographic, it could be roles within organizations and so on, but you want to share some thoughts about, is it one country and one message?
I think generally speaking, I would agree with that. I believe the answer is yes. Obviously, there's a lot of variables that play into this, what kind of product or service you're talking about. But when you talk about general expectations within the US market, whether it's B2B or B2C, it is, how well I feel valued. It is how well you're a part of the community. Are you giving back? Are you philanthropic? Are you trying to do the right thing? It's being culturally sensitive, right? Whether it's U.S. companies going overseas and doing international work, we need to be mindful of the cultures that we're servicing. And I think the same applies here. So it's how well you respect the culture, mine and yours. It's how well you service me, that you treat me as if I matter. It's speed and problem resolution. Don't point me to 5 different places to get the problem solved. Let me solve that problem on the first contact resolution. There is, I think, another important piece is that I feel that I'm getting value for the money I'm spending with you. And I think that is really, really important, because whether you have a high cost product or service or a low-cost product or service, it's really about, in the U.S. market, something that I see very clearly and very consistently is that I feel that I'm getting my value for what I'm spending with you. And if I'm spending more, I have higher expectations. So understanding me as your customer as well as my expectations, and then delivering on that, I'm willing to pay more for those. I would say where your bigger differences really come into play is whether you're dealing with a major metro market versus out in the suburbs. That's where some of your changes apply. Your cost sensitivities, your price of living, cost of living, those sorts of things in a New York City, in Atlanta, in LA, the list goes on, are very different than how we're viewing pricing and service outside of those markets. So I would say, yes, there's a lot of consistency in the U.S. market as one, but as you get into different products and services, in particular the audiences that you're serving, that to me is where the differences start to show up.
Got it. So it's more of a urban, suburban, rural difference than it is necessarily a geographic difference.
Yep.
And that's probably more in consumer than in B2B, I would imagine, or do you find that across both?
I think it's both. And I think the where the difference really from the B2C versus B2B is what I'll simply call the time to close, or the time to acquisition, whether it's client acquisition or a partnership, whatever the case may be. The speed in the B2B space is a little faster. Therefore, the expectations in how well you get me information, how well you communicate, what your differentiator is, what your market plan is, how I fit into that, how we work together. I think some of those expectations become a little bit higher. But even in the B2C marketplace as well, how you communicate those variables also plays in, but you have a little more leeway in the B2C space.
That makes sense. Okay, cool. No, that's all good. So we talked about the biggest mistakes that the companies make. Now, how much do you need to adapt, do you find, your messaging from, say, let's just take Europe as an example, and we could pick the UK or Germany just to pick a larger larger country. But how much adaptation in messaging to whether it's localizing it or specifically to the archetype that you find you're going to sell to in the US? What do you normally find there?
So I think there's really kind of two key variables. Like any messaging, what are the features and benefits? What is my organization getting from your organization? Does it fit within my expectation set and my needs? And then also my frequency and preference for communication, how that message is delivered. I would say probably almost on a 50-50 split, we see international messaging coming in and being very effective. It's different enough to catch attention. We also see some cases where even internal US messaging, which used to work for one market, no longer works for the same market. So I think with any messaging, one of the things that we're seeing is and this can be done at low cost, right? So this doesn't have to be a huge budget item, but bringing some small groups together and say, of your target audience, and saying, here's the messaging. Does it resonate with you? How does this make you feel? Does it give you a positive impression about our organization? Does it give you confidence that we know what the heck we're doing? Those sorts of things, a little bit of testing and a little bit of money spent on message and communication testing goes a long way. I think there's an orange juice company out there that will tell you when they changed their packaging once and didn't test it, cost them a lot more than if they had spent a little bit of time and energy testing that orange juice container.
Where you think of all the cost of just creating a new container and then the distribution of it and to not have it be correct, yeah, that's awfully expensive, I would guess. One of the things, and I'd love your comment on this, one of the things we see quite often with companies both that we're working with and that we're seeing in the marketplace is they lead with the features as opposed to the benefits. And I'm not sure if that's, we certainly see it on market entry companies, but we also see U.S. companies making the same mistakes. And I guess at least what we found works best, and your testing would help as well. But we do a fair amount of A/B testing. But is that leading with what's in it for the audience seems to be much better at attracting them to go down further in that message. Can you share some of what you found from an analytics standpoint to this?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think the one variable that really plays into this is what I simply call the demand of information. If you sit literally while the time we're going through this webinar and having this conversation, the amount of emails and phone calls and information that will be pushed that everyone that's watching this screen, it's a large number. And so there's lots of competition and demand for our time and our information. What happens there is consumers and businesses are telling us hands down across the board, you have to keep it short, you have to keep it sweet. Let me know what you're going to do for me and why I should get involved, whether it's a purchase, a merger, a partnership. And it's got to be done quickly because I have a lot of information that I have to process, and I have, kids or children at home. I've got employees at the office. I've got folks that are trying to sell me. We've got work that we need to do for our clients. We've got new clients and partners that we want to try to bring on. So all of this happens every single day. And now we get into these long communication, these long messages, these long marketing campaigns. Folks don't have the patience level. So I think, kind of what I see is short and sweet. Really makes the grade, and let me know right away why I need you, or make it so simple visually that I figure it out.
Well, and I mean, to that point too, so I was just, you were talking, I was playing through this sort of normal trade show that we go to in working with our clients and thinking about, we have at times tens of thousands of people going through the aisle every day by whatever booth and exhibit and so on. And half of them are introverts. And so, and we go through and we take a lot of photos of other people's booths when we're, sort of secret shopping or doing any type of research. And it blows me away at how much information people ask somebody walking down the aisle to evaluate, right? And so not only are half the people introverts, but then, they're just the detail. It's almost like the bad PowerPoints you see, right? They use the small font and you just see paragraphs and paragraphs, or spreadsheets that are way too detailed, as opposed to, I'm looking at your banners behind you, much simpler messages, easy to take in and move on. But, is that some of what you're talking about as well, is the idea that you can sort of get the headlines, and then if the headline makes sense, then you opt in and you go deeper and deeper and deeper, and until you either, sort of formalize something or say, this isn't for me.
Yeah, for sure. And listen, the clean banners are a thanks to you and your team and teaching hitting us over the head with it for all these years. When I think back to some of our early displays, I look at it and go, oh. But even early brochures, and when you think back to when the internet first came out, right? Think of what people's websites first looked like, right?
Sure.
There was no dynamic visualization in websites. It was books on a screen. And that has changed, right? Now we have inbound, outbound marketing. Now it's I'm captured by a trigger of some sort, whether it is here, is this your problem? Yes, it is. Okay, click here and read our white paper. Okay, does that white paper tell me more of what I need to know? Yes. You want to learn more? Yes, click here. So it is very much clean, short, and sweet, and particularly in the trade show arena, and we do a lot there as well with our clients and helping capture information along these trade show floors and things of that nature. Same deal. Keep it short and sweet, because whether introverted or extroverted, these folks are walking down that aisle looking for the answer to their problem. And if they can't find it quickly, they're moving on to the next booth. So being able to, and that is no different in your visual messages, your audio messages, anything that you're doing from a messaging content standpoint, let folks know who you are, what you do, and how you can help.
Yeah, I always love that. What was the saying? The radio station, the famous radio station, WIIFM. What's in it for me? Just thinking about that, and seems to go along exactly with what you're saying. So it's great to have all these wonderful references, but how do we know how we're doing, right? What are the KPIs? What are some of the best practices when it comes to developing the indicators of sort of whether it's traction, market entry success, any of those things in terms of, I would imagine the learning continues even after the first iteration.
Yeah, for sure. So, when I think about this, there's a couple of different ways. Any successful business anywhere in the world has done certain things to get to a point, right? They've understood who their audience was. They've taken the time to make sure that they service that audience well, whether it's B2B. It's about having competitive pricing. It's about having good service. It's about making it easy to do business with you. And I think those are the types of KPIs. When you're starting to think about what we did to get here, wherever here started, and whether your next here is the US or you're already here in the US, it's about understanding those areas or those characteristics that made your business successful in the first place. It's having reasonable margins. It's having satisfied customers. It's having engaged customers. And when I say customers, I mean internal and external, your employees as well as the people you service. But anything, when we start to look at what we're really measuring from a KPI perspective with most of our clients, it's usually some variation of that. It is how many attempts or contacts does it take for me to solve a problem? The fewer, the better. First contact resolution is probably my favorite KPI because if I call up and you say, I'm going to solve your problem and I'm going to make it right, you let me know that I'm important to you as a customer. So that's probably one of my first and most important KPIs. The second, and not a far second, is how well you treat your employees. High satisfaction levels among your employees strongly correlates to strong satisfaction levels with your end audiences. Cost of products and services in line with the value received. We talked about that earlier. And it can be as simple as asking that question. Do you feel like you get the value for the cost that you paid? And that encompasses all different price points, all different service levels. But at the end of the day, whether I know every single service you offer me, or I just perceive that you care and what I'm spending is reasonable. That's really important. Speed of service, reliability, a big thing in the U.S. and it's a growing trend. It's folks want to understand that you're a good community partner, that you're a good corporate citizen, that you're doing your part to lower some of the impacts on our environment, that you're doing everything that you can to take care of the communities in which your business is located. Are you giving back? And it doesn't have to be money. It can be time and resources, that you're going out and volunteering, that you're showing up and being a presence in your community. And then the last and most important two things, because one correlates with the other. More often than not, like I said, it's not a broken service or something that's broken. It's that folks don't know enough about you to provide a rating. So what folks know about you, how aware they are of your service offerings versus what they perceive to be. So if I actually offer you the right solution for your problem, but you don't know it, I'm being ineffective and we've lost that opportunity to work together, versus I have a high level of awareness of what you do, but you do a poor job of delivering it. So awareness can lead to negative perceptions, or lack of awareness rather can lead to negative perceptions. So understanding what your folks know and how they rate what they know are two very important variables. So that's a handful. Again, just to recap that list really quickly, number of contacts to solve a problem, customer employee satisfaction, cost of products and services are in line with services received, the speed of your service, the reliability of your service, you're a good community partner, you give back, and last but not least, how much people know about you directly correlates to what they think about you.
So are there any KPIs? So there's certainly a lot of customer service KPIs there, and sort of community stewardship type KPIs. Are there any that you find work really well for revenue generation and for customer acquisition?
Yeah, so I think it really boils down a lot to being authentic and being open and honest. And that's one that comes through very clear. And that's in all industries that we service. Having that authentic, and all this stems from some of those earlier variables that we talked about. If I know who I'm serving, whether it's on a B2B or B2C scenario, I know what they expect of me. I know what their problems and challenges are. I can have a very authentic, open, and honest communication in conversation with these folks. I can let them know how our service at a reasonable price point, and I mean our service by any service out there, whatever your service is, by walking in saying, let's have a real conversation. We believe we have a strong solution to the problem that you've initiated or identified for us, and here's how we can get there. So authenticity, honesty, ethics in what you do goes a long, long way, and that really cuts down a lot of the time and the energy to get from opening a door to closing a deal.
That makes sense. Totally cool. Yeah, so now maybe getting into a little bit more of the day-to-day work of research, and certainly we're all pretty familiar today with some of the online techniques. We get surveys all the time. Every time we stay in a hotel room or take a plane flight, we get, that company sending us surveys and all that. But if you wouldn't mind, talk about some of the differences between collecting data online versus collecting in person, and whether it's reliability, cost, what are the sort of the benefits and risks or costs of either?
Yeah, so I think what's really fun about today's market research landscape is that, again, thinking back to 20 years ago when I started, there was really two methodologies out. You did phone surveys, you did mail surveys, and that was kind of the quantitative arena that you had to play in, or you could do in person. And that was really it. In the introduction of digital, created all of these amazing things. It gave us some big needed cost reductions for the industry, for the end user to be able to go out and capture information. It allowed us to do it much faster. So there's all sorts of things. But I think as I really break down methodologies and research in today's market space, there's really kind of three variables that come into play. And it's the three-legged stool, if you will. It all starts out with who the audience is that you're speaking to. Talking to CEOs, versus talking to an end user consumer are two very different audiences. How we're going to speak to them, how we're going to collect information from them is very different. The second is, based on that audience, what methodology we're going to choose. And I'll talk through them in a second. The third is the reliability of the data that we're going to capture. Sometimes speaking to 8 people can be much more valuable than speaking to 800, right? When you talk to 8 CEOs, it can be more valuable than if you're talking to 800 of their end user customers, and vice versa, right? So when we think about some of the methodologies that are out there today, obviously you have your email, your digital-based surveys, some of the ones that you mentioned. Phone surveys are still very much very popular. The amount of phone work that we've done is actually picked up. Is it harder to capture folks by phone today? Yes, it is. But we're still doing it, right? There's one-on-one intercepts. There's still mail surveys from time to time that are still actually a good way to go. They're mostly done in community surveys or hard to reach areas where you might not have great reception, or there's lower internet access. Focus groups are still very important. There's still a huge benefit to sitting across the table, looking eye to eye from someone, being able to put visuals in front of them and have them react to something. As a moderator, I can see a reaction versus something they may tell me. I can see them saying, "Yeah, I agree with you." So body language in many ways can tell us what they're really thinking.
Sure.
So we can push back and we can dive in, we can dig. In-home use tests. A lot of our overseas manufacturers that are coming into the U.S. markets want to see visually what's happening inside someone's homes with their products or technologies. Bulletin boards are technology. Think of it as a focus group at your iPad or at your computer or on your phone, where you can be all over the country engaging with a smaller group of folks, and then one-on-one intercept. So when you think about all of those different methodologies that we have available to us and to the marketplace today, it really depends on what your goals are. So what we've seen historically is that folks want to ask all the questions they can, because the belief has always been, well, I have their attention, I'm going to ask them everything under the sun, when in reality is you should really be building your research based on exact questions that you need answers to. A business problem, a market need, how are we going to increase our sales? Ask the questions that you need to make decisions with. When you do that, you actually start to compress the time that you engage with your audience, and they'll be more likely to communicate with you in the past. It's the very reason those same surveys that you're getting at the end of flights are 1, 2, 3 questions in nature.
Right.
How did we do? Did we do well in this area? How could we improve? And usually there's a reason behind they're asking about that one specific area, but it really boils down to, at the end of the day, the audience that you're speaking to, the methodology that you're utilizing, the reliability, or the business questions that you have to answer moving forward.
Cool. So particularly, let's talk about this particular question related to market entry. So how important is it for companies to understand the competition as they're going into a new market?
I'm probably the wrong guy to ask that question, but I will give you my take on it. Number one, there's a lot of research firms in the U.S., and they range from small single consultants, 1, 2 people shops to the big guys and gals that you've heard about, right? And so we have taken the approach of being a strong middle market firm. That's one of our differentiators. We felt like no one was taking care of the middle. The big organizations had someone they could go to, and the smaller folks did. I'm a firm believer that competition is where you're at a particular point in time. There are times that I compete against some of the larger research firms in the world, and there's times that I'm competing against the smaller organizations. It depends on the audience and the client. I really believe if you're focusing more on your audience and you have an authentic solution to their need, and you spent the time getting to know what they need and how you can solve that, to me, at that point, the authenticity really overpowers any competition. I think you have to know where your pricing is. I think you have to know what your differentiators are. I think you have to know what you do well, and you can't be too generic about that. So I think competition, understanding it to a certain degree, is important, but I don't go crazy with it because I feel like if at the end of the day, I can sit in front of a prospective client and let them know how we can help and they believe what we're doing and how we're approaching it, I have a good opportunity to win that business.
So so just thinking about that again, I'm in, let's say, Germany, and I've got a company that supplies a service to board members of Fortune 100 companies or Fortune 500. So I guess I'm kind of thinking that it would be helpful for me to know what the market is in terms of market size and whatnot, and the competitive landscape, so that I can make not just even a competitive decision about how to come into the market successfully, but even what the opportunity is and how does this opportunity compare to what if I went instead to South America or to some other continent or some other country, or Canada or whatnot. Do you get into that type of, or is that type of research valuable to do the comparative market entry information from a competitive landscape?
For sure. And I think, and I don't disagree with any of that, Bill. I think for me, there's two ways to look at markets and competitors, right? So number one, there's the market here in the US, as you mentioned, versus how that market might apply in other countries throughout the globe. That makes sense. But then I also think about competition as to who else is offering a competitive product or service similar to mine. Who might I be competing against for your business? In the latter of those two audiences, I think it's important to know, have a good understanding of your audience and who you're competing against. But I've seen people gain paralysis by analysis and
Sure.
try to pivot too much. And it takes away from that authenticity of who you are. I think to some degree, you have to be able to stand in front of boards and leadership and say, this is what we do. Here's the experience that we have. Here's how we can make your business better. And they either going to believe you or they're not. And if they believe you, at that point, if you work too hard to bring your price down to beat someone from a price sensitivity, you might be leaving some revenue on the table because they may have seen your value as greater than the person that was actually offering that same service for a higher cost. So obviously, I strongly believe in knowing your audience, knowing your market, doing your homework, and being able to speak to those areas, because any smart and savvy board are going to ask you those questions. So you have to be able to answer them. But at the end of the day, I think how you deliver on those answers, how you deliver on that brand promise, how you deliver on your service or product is at the end of the day where the rubber meets the road.
Sure. Yeah. So it sounds like we're on the same page in terms of you need to use that information to make the decision as to which market to enter. Yeah. But it sounds like it's less critical when you're actually executing on the market entry, and really then it's about having an authentic message that will be relevant and salient to the audience you're talking to.
Yeah, and I think as you enter a market, whether it's the U.S. or somewhere internationally, as you enter into that market and you start to get settled and stable, that's where I think understanding more of that nuance allows your growth and maturity to happen. But if it's grassroots, we need to get in, we need to get set up, we need to get established, you could spend tons and tons of dollars on market analysis, whereas you could spend those numbers as you do a little bit of time and energy doing your homework with your audiences and the market, saying, look, the market's ripe for us. Let's get in and get to work and then start to understand. And I think it's, MVP versus your end goal in many cases as well.
That makes total sense. So let me ask one last question, and then we're going to flip it to the audience question. So, and this is probably, I think you segued us really well to this question. So, when you think about sort of a typical program for a market entry company, and let's just sort of imagine a mid-sized service company, consulting company, just to pick something. What would a typical program look like? What would your recommendations be if they want to, enter the market in, whether it's in 3 months or 12 months or whatever?
All right, so I'll make a quick assumption here. I'll make an assumption that this business is already established in the other country, and that they're not looking to start up here.
Let's say that they're already in 12 countries. They're across Europe. They've got several hundred employees, or even, a few hundred employees.
Yeah, so from that standpoint, we start to look at who ultimately they're servicing and what their product or service, whether it's consulting B2B, whether it's an end consumer customer for a product. At the end of the day, we're going to start and really understand what their goals and objectives are in entering the U.S. market. Is it, we already have a roadmap that has been successful in each of those 12 countries? If so, we want to test that roadmap, get an understanding if their audience in those other 12 countries is consistent with a similar audience here, or where there might be some differentiators, where that audience may actually take a strong left turn compared to where they've been historically. So we want to understand first that audience, and that audience is who they think they are here. From that standpoint, how they communicate and what their strategic plan is, what their roadmap or their game plan is to deliver their product service, what types of channels, how they advertise, how they message, how they communicate, how they message and really offer up their brand, how they describe their brand, and does it resonate with that audience. From that standpoint, I think really kind of the third component is how well they do on delivering, right? So it is, I understand that audience, I understand the game plan. Does that game plan resonate with how I, as your audience, will receive that information? And then as you get in and start to offer it, how well do I do at doing that? And that gets into some of that speed. Based on timelines, based on budgets, based on how quickly they're looking to pull the trigger and do things like that, determines what the price point looks at that, and any one of those methodologies could be utilized. If you're more refining, I would go with a bit more of the qualitative methodologies, such as focus groups, some of those bulletin boards, intercepts, those sorts of things, versus if I really need to understand from scratch that audience, I'm probably going to go after more of a digital or a phone methodology to get started.
Got it. And so it's really about, it sounds like doing a variety of assumption testing to identify what the best sort of audience and messaging will be to enter the market at the highest velocity.
Yeah, I totally. And I think for us, the way that looks for us is it's always customized work, right? So
sure.
We want to make sure that the business questions or problems that you have, every piece of data we collect is directly tied to that. Perfect.
Love it. Okay. So let's look at, let's hop into these audience questions. I think there's some really good ones here. So, let's see. So, and sometimes we get these in phrases. So let's see if we can actually make a question out of this. So access to the right purchasing decision contacts, retail segmentation for private label sales. So can market research help us identify the right purchasing contacts and specifically those that would be interested in private label sales?
Yeah, for sure. And so, a lot of the B2B research that we're doing is exactly that. And it is, tell me who makes a decision, how they buy, what their procurement or purchasing details are. Are there certain segments or industries that are better suited for our service versus others? So again, as it gets back to that, who's the audience in that particular case, is there might be an assumption that manufacturing or tech or finance is our end audience. We start to reach out to those companies and say, are you having this problem, business problem? Would you benefit from a solution? If those two answers are yes, then it gets into what is the decision-making process? What is the procurement process that goes on there? Then we start to accumulate that and quantify what that looks like. So yeah, that happens all the time. And that's a big part of the B2B work that's being done on a regular basis.
Cool. So you mentioned MVP just a couple of minutes ago. We'll kind of go down that customer discovery channel. So the next question is product market fit. What clues in market research, or I'm going to edit this a little bit. What clues can market research give you in terms of the best indication that it's time to pivot?
Yeah, so there's a few that jump out immediately. There's probably 20 of them that, if given a little bit of time, I could figure out. But I think at the end of the day, there's likelihood to engage. There is understanding of what we get versus what we're spending, right? So that that pricing model for the package, whether it's a consulting service, whether it is manufacturing, it doesn't matter. It's my likelihood to purchase, and starting to track that. I think in addition to what I do, or what the organization does for its end audience, measuring that, also keeping an eye on those market conditions, and are the market conditions changing? Data will tell you that if you ask the right questions the right way, you build them in an independent and objective fashion, they're not going to lead you to the answer that you hope for. They're going to lead you to the answer that is accurate. And so what I would see is those organizations that, as the data is moving away from their desired endpoint, right? So things are getting, we'll just use the term, worse, or further away from the desired goal. Those organizations that are diving in saying, okay, is this us? Is this something that we've done wrong? Or is the market shifting? Those organizations that are paying attention to those metrics, and then saying, okay, our next bit of research, or our next data collection is going to be tied to, okay, it seems that the market's shifting away from XYZ. Here's an alternative that addresses a separate problem or need or issue. Is this something you might be interested in? Yes. And so understanding, and usually business owners and business leaders have the hunch of where it's heading anyway. They just don't see the data soon enough to say,
support it.
I'm right, and so sometimes they're hoping that gut will change, but the reality is sometimes their gut's telling them the market's changing. Go get the information and the data, and your true entrepreneurs, your true leaders are looking at that information, being humbled by it, and saying, okay, the data's telling me it's time to move. And if you ask the questions the right way, you're going to know the answer to where you move and where you head next.
There are two things that strike me here. One is thinking about the Wayne Gretzky adage. The famous hockey player was asked, of course, by the reporter, what makes you better than other hockey players? And he said, other hockey players go where the puck is. I go where the puck is going. Right. So I think totally of that. And I also think of an early comment you made in this, and that is the difference. One of the bigger mistakes that you see executives making is that they're not open to the data. They've sort of chosen a path, and they're sort of, it's like going to Las Vegas. They're fully committed. All the money's moved to that number on the table, and there isn't the wisdom to actually pivot to the point of this question. And I would imagine, and you used the word nimble early on, I would imagine nimble is really such an important quality. Is that, am I putting words in your mouth, or are we?
Not at all. You summarized it perfectly. And I think that's probably one of the big things is again, what we're being asked by a lot of our clients is to be nimble with our data collection, so that we can get them real-time information when there are market changes, when there are pivots that need to be made. But I think there's a happy balance and a medium to getting too excited and making a wrong move, versus being patient but not waiting too long and missing the boat either. So I think there's a fine balance, and every organization's works differently that way, because in many cases I get asked the question, how often should I do research? And my answer to that question is, how fast can you make changes based on the data? When you start to look at some industries, one comes to mind is utilities in the US. The folks that built that system are now running that system. They have, in many cases, a baby boomer, from a demographic standpoint, mentality, when in reality, the generations coming up behind them think very differently. And so that's where the data can help that leadership group say, okay, here's how I can keep this group of customers happy, but I also need to be taking care of these folks as well, because they think differently than me. And that's a customer example, but it's the same in a B2B scenario. It's what your leadership is, who you're serving, and are you staying in touch with that group? And if it's a group that's changing all the time, understanding where they're changing, being able to pivot to that is mission critical.
I suppose that's why you customize your service to every client, because there isn't that one size fits all where you go, oh, this is the formula, and just follow these 3 steps and we'll be good, because their markets are different, the conditions they're operating in with personnel and boards and so on are different. So being able to build a program that fits all of those variables, I suppose.
Yeah, and as a big hockey fan, Bill, that's our way. Our differentiator is going where the puck is going,
sure.
not where it is. So that for us is where we bring our skill set to the table, and all those smart people that I talked about earlier sitting in the office with me.
Sure, absolutely. So 2 more questions here. So one is, how can I find reliable data?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different sources. And I think, for me, I'm a big proponent of finding data and capturing data that's specific to your business, your need. Because the reality is I get asked all the time, particularly with our healthcare clients, hey, can you tell me how we compare to other 100-bed, 500-bed hospitals? And I said,
Sure.
well, your 100-bed hospital is in the middle of Oklahoma. I don't think it really matters how a 100-bed hospital in Fairfield, Connecticut matters. It's how well you're serving your audience. So from that, I'm a real big fan and proponent of capture your own data when it matters. It doesn't mean that secondary data isn't good, isn't strong. I think understanding who captured it and by what methodology is more important than the data that you find, because we can all go find data and make it and spin it in such a way that it meets what we want to say. But knowing that it was captured the right way and knowing where it came from is where you can defend that data. But there's lots of industry and trade associations in all different organizations and industries where they have omnibus type studies or they're capturing industry data. That's where I would start with those kinds of associations or industries, because they want to make sure that they're servicing their industry the right way. So they're doing a good job of making sure that the data is clean and accurate.
That's fantastic. And then the last question here, how can I target my desired audience? I want to know how we can win their business, but don't know how to contact them. So the question again, how can I target my desired audience?
Yeah, so that is the easiest way to do that is as you start to have that understanding of who your desired audience is, and for that, I'm going to make the assumption that the viewer sent in and they have an idea of who their audience is. What's great about the U.S. data and market research market is if you want to know 80-year-old grandmothers who roller skate on Sundays, I can usually narrow down a list of that group. It may be a very small list, but we can typically find them. As researchers, we don't have to follow the same rules that telemarketers do because we're not selling anything. So that said, we have access to data, and who knows what the next legislative session will do to all of that. But as it stands today, at the time of recording here, we have the ability to capture data and information about folks that telemarketers and folks who are selling can't. So we have the ability to go reach your desired and target audience and ask them those very questions. And that's where a little bit of energy, time, and resources to market research can really help you narrow down how you target your audiences. But again, starting with a market research firm, whether it's ours or any one of my colleagues in the industry, and I will tell you from that standpoint, I'm really proud of this industry. We get together, there's about 100 or so CEOs every year get together from our industry at a summit somewhere all over the country, and we're actually going internationally now as well. And we get together and talk about how can we be the best sources of data for the U.S. market, for folks coming here, and all the international markets as well. We want to do great work, and we have a strong belief in doing that. So hope that was helpful, Bill, and hopefully shared a little bit of insight. But again, I think in that particular question, it's go find a market research partner and have them help guide you along the way.
Yeah, we do a little bit of testing at trade shows, and we use a metaphor that feel free to steal if it helps in any way. So we sort of reference it like the decision that somebody makes when they're going fishing, right? So somebody that's going fishing makes three basic decisions, right? What do I want to catch? Which actually is not a very easy decision. There are 34,000 species of fish, plus a whole bunch more subspecies, right? So actually answering that question is brutally difficult. But think about when you do make that decision, you've eliminated 33,999 things you're not going to catch, right? Which is incredibly empowering from a marketing standpoint. And then, of course, from there, where am I going to fish? And then what's the bait I'm going to put in the water?
And transportation that I'm going to use to get there, right?
Yeah, I mean, but ultimately, from a revenue generation standpoint, if you get those three things right, the rest is really you're going down a lot of the right path. So, but I love all this. Is really, really a great topic, and you guys are doing amazing work, and you've helped some of our clients, and that's been fantastic. So, I guess I'd ask, just for a final thought, is there something, as we sort of close up here, is there something you want to make sure the audience knows about, or just maybe a final summary nugget that you want to share?
Yeah, in having been around this industry for 20, I think I'm in my 22nd year, 21st, 22nd. I think if there's one thing that really stands out to me after all the years, we've watched people collect data and do very little with it. We've watched people collect more data than they need and get hung up by it. I think at the end of the day, capture the right amount of data that works for you, that you can use. One thing that you taught me, Bill, very early on in my career was don't go to a networking event and get 500 cards and not follow up with any of them. Walk in and get the number that you feel you can follow up with. And I've held very true to that. My number is 5. As I get a little older, it may go less, but my goal is that when I walk into any event, I'm looking to meet 5 people that I can build a relationship with and have some follow-up conversations with. And it makes it easy for me to follow up with one of them each day of the following week. So that has been something that has worked really well for me. When I think about that for the folks that we do research with, collect the right amount of information that you can act upon. But at the end of the day, if you collect too much, you can get paralyzed by it. Sometimes the market or the data will tell you that it's time to pivot. I always say raise your energy level first and then see what the data tells you afterwards, because somebody that walks in and is excited about what they do and excited about the solution that they have is going to usually get their audience excited about that. So sometimes the market is right and the data is telling us the right thing, but we're not bringing enough energy to the table. And that's been a philosophy that I've used. It's worked pretty well for us. And one KPI that we measure internally here at Greatblue is how many tables do we get to sit down at, and how many closed deals do we get from those tables. And so for us, it's about getting in front of people, letting them know how much we love this industry and doing the work. And our folks get excited about this, and our clients and our prospects see that. And that's how generally we win the business. But then you have to deliver on it. You have to deliver on that brand promise, and you got to deliver on the product or the service that you're selling. And when you do, then the referral engine gets started, and then the recurring business engine gets started. So doing a little bit of that homework up front and learning what to do, but capturing the right information, that goes a long, long way to success and longevity, particularly here in the U.S. markets.
Sure. Well, and I imagine too, just the energy you and your team bring to this, it's just it's infectious. So it's great to see. And I know in many cases you guys are sort of an embedded resource within your clients' businesses, that really trusted consultant and advisor, which puts you in a really unique spot.
Yeah, and and what it means is that some days we have to deliver great news, and more often than not, we have to deliver tough news. But it's sure. For us, as a leader, I always say, bring me 2 solutions, not 2 problems. And it's the same thing for our clients. We have to walk in the door and say, you have an issue here, but we've already uncovered what the potential solution or solutions are. And so I think that's really important. And I see that across the country, across the U.S. I see it really with most businesses that we work with, whether it's international or here in the U.S. But folks want answers. And again, as you get back to that whole, that differentiator, folks are busy. There's a lot of information coming your way. So as a resource, a B2B partner or B2C partner, bring solutions to the table and help them deliver their product service a little more efficiently to the marketplace.
Absolutely brilliant. So let me just share our next webinar so that folks know when that is, and then we'll close up. So our next webinar is Thursday, July 18th. The topic is going to be starting a conversation and identifying opportunity at events. And that's actually going to be in a similar format with one of our team members, Sue Powers, who is amazing. And so she's really a sales and networking event expert. And so this is going to be a lot of fun, and a lot of people really struggle with starting those conversations and really creating enough of a conversation so that they know what an appropriate next step would or should or shouldn't be with the people they're talking to. And kind of to your point just a few minutes ago in terms of walking away with 5 good contacts, is I think we should start with some objective. It's hard to hit something we're not aiming at, right? So Mike, I really have to thank you for spending the time with us today. This has been fantastic. I know our audience is going to really react well to this. We'll make sure that folks get your contact info as well. And again, appreciate so much you taking the time with us today.
Always a pleasure. You know I love this stuff, so I always appreciate the opportunity to talk through it. Thanks, Bill. Always great to talk with you.
Same here. Thanks so much, Mike.
Have a good day, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye now.